Hi, I'm Misha Ketchell, editor of The Conversation. For democracy to work, people need to be well informed. That's why we work with academic experts to share their research and explain issues in the news. Everything we do is free to republish, but we need your support. Please donate to The Conversation by going to donate.theconversation.com or following the link in the show notes.
From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
Barnaby Joyce is one of the most colourful federal politicians of recent times. He's been Nationals leader twice and Deputy Prime Minister also twice. His career has hit the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. As a senator, he was a maverick, often crossing the floor. As party leader, he had a dramatic falling out with then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Later, he delivered to Prime Minister Scott Morrison the Nationals' support for net zero, while personally disagreeing strongly with the policy. Now he's decamping to the reinvigorated One Nation at a time when the minor party is soaring in the polls. He joins us today on the podcast. Barnaby Joyce, you've had a varied relationship over the years with One Nation. You've been highly critical of Pauline Hanson at times, but also even before you joined the party, you were quite close to her. What made you defect from the Nationals at this time?
Two things. Number one is I felt there was more of a clarity of policy within One Nation. And I felt that it had a form of strength that was being appraised and then supported by the Australian public. I found it peculiar that we had to always sort of worry about One Nation when I thought, well, if we were worrying about One Nation, then maybe One Nation are correct. And the polling has shown that that is the case. Number two is something I don't like going over, but it's just a fact. My working relationship with Mr. Littleproud was completely dysfunctional. It was discordant. I was becoming bitter, and that's not the mind space that I want to be in. Obviously, Mr. Littleproud has talked about generational change, which was afoot in regards to me, which is a case of I want you out of here. During the campaign, don't campaign outside your electorate. And then being, even in the metaphorical sense, being placed in the back corner of the chamber and never given a question. It was all about time for you to go. And at 58, I believed I wasn't right to go. I thought I had more to offer my nation. And so those two factors coming together brought about my defection to One Nation, where I believe that I'm back on the balls of my toes. It's positive. I'm engaged in the parliamentary debate. I have purpose, and I'm not just withering on the vine in the corner of oblivion.
Was that breakdown in relationship over substance or over not being top dog, or, to change the metaphor, an old bull, young bull thing?
I don't know. More of the point of I don't really want to go into the vagaries of it, but relationships break down over a myriad of issues, not one. With one, you can get over it. But when you have a sort of a litany of issues and you have what is a repeat of actions, then you get to a point where you say, okay, we're not going to get along. And that's all people really need to know. And so that's where I'll leave it.
So how's your local community, your local supporters in New England reacted to your defection?
Overwhelmingly supportive. And people don't believe it, but I had another media outlet up the other day, and they said, can we go down the street and can you find people for us to talk to about this? And I said, that won't be too hard. We walked out the door. We couldn't get 150 metres up the street. It became impossible because everyone was talking to us, and so we had to go back to my office. And their words were, it's like going for a walk down the street with the Pope.
Right. An interesting comparison, I might say.
Now, I'm not going to say that happens every day, but I don't think that it is a fact. Overwhelmingly supportive.
Okay, so you've said, however, that you're going to run for the Senate in New South Wales at the next election. So if there's such support in New England, why not run for New England?
Well, I've said that, but the rejoinder to that is obviously me saying what I'm going to do is only half the story. You have to have a discussion with the party, and the party also determines what is good for them. You can't run for anything unless the party agrees to it. And, that's the same with all political parties. So as you get closer, there'll be the discussions. But if you said, has there been a discussion about running for New England? No, not in a formative sense. So the plan is to stand for the Senate for New South Wales, but I don't want to sort of rule things out, because if that circumstance changed, you'd be a liar. But I don't really want to get the hairs running, you're running for New England, because that's not the plan. But, as we get closer, people will look at things in a more sort of cogent way and make a decision about what's best. At this point in time, it is my wish, and other people have agreed that it'd be standing for the Senate.
So just to be clear, it's not impossible that there could be a change of plan. You ran for New England.
It's not impossible.
Are you concerned at a broader level that with One Nation surging and the Liberals and the Nationals in chaos, this could in fact split the right-wing vote in Australia, the right of centre vote, and that will just advantage Labor?
Well, no, I disagree with the premise of that question. I think that the voters always have it right. And if the voters decide that they want an alternate voice to the one they've been listening to, then that's their right, and they'll get it. People change votes. I mean, this is always the sort of upside down logic of Canberra. They believe that they don't have to earn votes, they own votes. And they get really sort of intemperate when people say, well, you can't go vote for somebody else. Well, actually, people can. They can vote any way they wish. And we've seen that globally, that there's been a move to more clarity in the conservative side of the agenda. I don't see conservatism as an evil word. I think it means that you don't experiment, don't have social experimentation or economic experimentation on things that you don't know where they're going to end up, because sometimes they end up in a very bad place and you can't unwind them. And I don't think progressives are necessarily progressive. I think progressives is a euphemism for experimental, and sometimes experimental is leads to bad outcomes. And I'm very much of the conservative ilk. I can go through sort of a list of things like that, which no doubt you'll bring up. I don't believe in multiculturalism. I believe in an Australian culture, and people have to work within those guardrails of an Australian culture, because if you have a sort of multiplicity and sort of a completeness in multiculturalism, like absolutely different cultures, you have a balkanization, and with the balkanization you get friction, you get heat, and ultimately you get death. And we've unfortunately seen that in its most tragic form in Australia recently. So I believe you have to work within the guardrails of an Australian culture, which is temperate, which is egalitarian, which is accepting of others, and them being accepting of you, laconic, everything else. But it's an Australian culture, and I think the Australian culture has worked so brilliantly until recent times.
I'll come back to a bit of that in a moment, but do you see One Nation potentially partially replacing the Nationals?
I see that as a decision for the Australian people. We've had the polls, they're indicative, they're not a vote. And in those indicative polls, it shows the Australian people are giving us a chance. And the Australian people determine who represents them.
But what do you think is happening? What's the drift of things?
The drift of things is this is a global phenomenon. What we are seeing is as people now graze for news in a myriad of places, we don't have broadsheet grazing for media. We don't have ABC and a commercial channel. Fairfax and Murdoch in media. People are going to sometimes their echo chamber, but their silo of thought, and reinforcing that silo of thought. And that means that silo of thought is reflected in more political parties. Now, what we're seeing in England is with Farage, with France, Le Pen, with Germany, AfD, and I believe that's a little bit dangerous, to be quite frank. Milano in Italy, the MAGA movement in the United States, which is bigger than Donald Trump. This is what's happening. Australia is actually late to the party, not leading the party. And the rise of One Nation is people looking for clarity, unity, and strength. They don't want to hear about you finding the sensible centre. They want you to stand behind a bookend of principles that you can clearly enunciate. It's got to go beyond. Sometimes you hear politicians talk about their values and their principles, but they never actually tell you what they are. and people see through that and they call it for what it is, merely rhetoric. But with One Nation, they say, well, whether you like it or not, we know what they stand for.
But we've seen these spikes in One Nation support before, but it doesn't necessarily translate into votes on election day or the level of support on election day. Do you think that the present situation is different?
Yes, I do. And I think there was a tactics in the past, sort of almost a sort of a complicit purpose between the parties to put One Nation last because they did see it as a threat. I was one of the first people within the coalition to say I'm not preferencing One Nation last because that is wrong. If you talk to some of the people in some of the other political parties on the Senate ticket, you'll realise how crazy they are. And One Nation is not crazy. They have a strong views, but I don't think they're a sort of an evil, maligning force. And more and more that is the case now. Over time, people become more experienced and tempered, and I think that's where One Nation is, and I think it's incredibly important that One Nation is maintained in the Australian polity because it resonates with people who now want a more clarity, unity, and strength in what they see. Now, going to another section of that, Michelle, you've got to remember. Well, you don't have to remember because you know perfectly well. The Prime Minister of Australia and the Labor Party got there on less than 35% of the vote. In 1975. Of the 112 seats, I think of 103 of them were won on primaries. In the seat of Capricornia, there was a three-cornered contest between Labor, Liberals, and the Nationals. Labor got 48% of the primary and lost because there was a lot more tribalism. That's the way it was. That is no longer the case. Now there was only 11 seats at the last election that were won on primaries. The rest went to preferences. There are so many there who, if they get in the mid-40s, they think they're doing well. In the past, that was a recipe for losing your seat. So over time, politics has changed.
Do you think over time One Nation's changed? You're sort of suggesting that it's become a bit more mainstream.
Well, everybody over a time learns and grows, and I think that I think Pauline has done a great job. I think she's, she still has strong views and she still has certain mechanisms in her narrative, which mightn't be mine, but are hers. When you think about it, if you said, what do you find particularly noxious about what Pauline has said in this term of Parliament, I don't think people are going to really find much. They say, she's got very strong views, but I don't find them noxious. I find them based on logic, and therefore they stand.
There was the burqa incident.
Yeah, I think that's theatre, really, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, let's go down to that. Obviously, I'm not going to be wearing a burqa, but can I just go through that? I remember speaking to an Islamic person who had just happened to be called Muhammad Ali from one of the charities in the west suburbs of Sydney. Now, I was questioning him about the burqa incident. I said, is it part of the Islamic faith? He went, no. It's a cultural garment. It's in a lot of Islamic countries, especially in sort of Asia Minor. It's banned. You can't wear it. So it's a cultural garment. It's really something that sort of pertains to Afghanistan, other areas. So I think it is an item in many instances that portrays submissiveness. And in the Australian culture, I think we have to be cautious of that. I suppose you can wear what you want, but I don't think we've got to have an eye to people if we think they're being pushed around. I think that's one issue. Also, and I don't profess for 1 second to be any expert in the Quran, but in asking people who are, they said, no, the Quran talks about modesty and dress. It doesn't talk about wearing a burqa.
So are you defending that appearance or saying it wasn't appropriate?
What the issue is that she got kicked out for wearing a burqa because people were supporting you wearing a burqa. There's a sort of a paradox there, isn't there?
Let's come back to this question of translating the vote into actual votes, the support into actual votes. This week, One Nation announced that you'd recruited Cory Bernardi, one-time Liberal senator, to lead the South Australian Upper House ticket. Will the South Australian election, which will be held in March, be in fact a very important milestone to judge the One Nation real support in the community at this point of time?
Every election is a milestone to judge the support in the community. And so this, nonetheless, will also be something to be judged by. I think that's a fair call. And then you react to it and, where your strength was, you build on it. Where your weakness was, you remedy it or leave it behind. That's how politics works. So it'll be both, I suppose, a process of observation and also a test.
Will you be campaigning a lot there?
Yes, I'll definitely campaign in South Australia.
Now, you were talking about multiculturalism and how you don't support it. A lot of Pauline Hanson's rhetoric is about ensuring that migrants fit in with Australian values, and that's obviously your strong view. But who decides what Australian values are, and how do you actually measure if a person's going to fit in? Because they can say, yes, of course, I believe in all these things, but they don't necessarily.
Let's go through those. I mean, would we want people to come to Australia who don't fit in, who are antagonistic to our egalitarian views, to our liberties, to our temperance? I mean, is that what we want?
But don't we also, at the moment, ask them about those things?
Well,
so what more are you advocating?
Well, I think that you have to understand, if there's any form of belligerence or partisanship that might be clearly apparent in people when they come in, maybe by reason of the environment they come from, I think you have to be a lot more diligent. Now, I don't care if someone comes in from the Vatican City. If they're not suited for Australia, I don't want them here. But I think you have to be an adult. You can't just say, oh, well, I'm not going to ask the harder questions when they need to be asked. If you come from an area, for instance, where there's Islamic fundamentalism, I think you have a duty to say exactly how is this going to work? Because I think that you'll find there's a range of people across the political spectrum who said if you hold blindly and absolutely to those views, it just will not work in Australia because you're going to be completely at odds with so many people from the left and the right, I might say. And so therefore, it's not saying no, but you have to say, I know, we're going to ask a lot more questions. And I think that's completely within the Australian people's rights. We get sort of got this sort of where we're emasculated with political correctness. It says, oh, no, you just, even if you have a concern, you can't ask that question. No, you can. You can.
But don't we ask quite a lot of questions already is what I'm asking you. And what more questions precisely would you ask this person?
Well, I'd also do two ways. I'd also say I think there's a contractual obligation if you come to Australia that you're neither on social security nor in the crime pages. And I think we have to make a judgment of, okay, so in taking people in from around the world, have we got a disproportionate number of people from certain areas that end up either in the crime pages or on social security? And if that's the case, I'll be blunt. I don't want someone coming to Australia if all we do is every other worker in Australia from that point forward has to pay for them. That is of no use to anybody. And I certainly don't want someone coming in and the first thing they are going on a sort of a process of trying to change the culture of Australia to the country from which they came. I mean, if that's what you believe, don't come to Australia. Stay there. It's because this is one of the things One Nation will do. We are not going to be sort of hamstrung by political correctness to say that we believe in an Australian culture because it is that form of egalitarianism that has made us such a beautiful nation, and I don't want to put that at threat. And especially after Bondi, we have the right, and in fact, we have the duty to ask harder questions. And to even at this point in time, to be running away from it and saying, oh, well, I can't talk about that anymore. Well, you should. Otherwise, it's wrong. And we have to say, how did that happen? What did you believe in that made you justify in your head that you could go on a human turkey shoot on a Sunday afternoon against innocent people? And I am going to ask hard questions about how that happened. And if that means that people of that ilk who have an absolutist view are no longer welcome, well, people who have an absolutist view are no longer welcome. And I could say, that's just purely an attack on Islam. No, not really. If someone said, Oh, well, I'm an absolute, I'm a Christian fundamentalist, and I'm just going to give my children serpents to dance with, and then I'm going to get my oldest son and see if I can, see if God talks to me before I sacrifice him. I'll say, you are also a bad person. I do not want you here.
But if you're an immigration officer and we're toughening the criteria, what are two questions that we don't ask now that you would be asking the prospective migrant?
Well, I think that's unfair because it presumes I have total knowledge of every question they ask and how I'd improve it or change it. But so I'm not going to sort of go into sort of particulars unless you want to put before me the particulars of every question they now ask. I'd be looking very closely at what they did in the country they were in. I would be, for instance, if you need builders, were you a builder? Are you a qualified builder? Where did you work? I would be wanting to know from other people around them, prove to me a sense of temperance, prove to me a sense of egalitarianism, prove to me your desire to live with other people in the community who have different religious views to yours and who probably have different social views to yours. Are you going to be a tolerant person both in Tamworth and in Oxford Street, or are you going to work at complete angles? Because if that's what you think, we can't have you.
Okay, back to One Nation. Pauline Hanson has talked up the party's adopting a fully fledged branch structure. And I gather that even recently there have been new branches or branch set up in Eden Monero, the electorate close to Canberra, and maybe, I'm not sure of this, maybe in Wagga Wagga or the...
Oh, they're everywhere.
Districts. So just tell me how many branches, how many total members does the party have, and what will be the power of these branches?
Well, I'm not going to disclose our total membership.
Right.
What I can say is our membership is vastly bigger than either the National Party.
What's the National Party's then?
Well, there's only about, in the Liberal, let's go to the Liberal Party. I think the Liberal Party have 10,000 members and only 6,000.
Nationally?
No.
In New South Wales?
Yeah, New South Wales. And I think only 6,000 are financially there. Unfortunately, it's been a malaise. What we have with One Nation is people joining flat out. It is rather remarkable. And they're from all sections of society, from the very top of business to the pensioner. And
so how many branches?
Well, once more, I can give you these questions, but as we say in politics, let's take that on notice. I'm happy to get back to you. But if you ask for specific detail, it's like me going and asking for the budget numbers from a minister. Unless you're going to tell them you're going to ask them, they're not going to give it to you because all I'd be doing is plucking it out of thin air.
So you're saying, though, that you're getting a lot of recruitment
Massive
at the
amounts.
moment.
Massive amounts.
Tell me about the power of the branch member of One Nation. Will he or she have a say in choosing the candidates in their electorate?
Absolutely. If you go to an area and there's an overwhelming sense amongst the membership, remember they have to hand out for the person, and they have to be the support structure. And if they don't like the person, I think people work out very quickly that that's an inappropriate person to have as your candidate.
Well, One Nation has had problems with inappropriate candidates and indeed some MPs.
Everybody
So what are you doing now or what are you going to do to try and vet candidates more precisely? This is a problem, as you say, for all parties, but I think especially has been for One Nation.
Well, I think what we have to appreciate is the growth of the party and where Pauline started. You remember the party was basically gone, finished. And Pauline Hanson, who had been put in jail by the coalition, let's be frank, because they thought that was the way to deal with Pauline, as put her in jail. I remember my mother saying, and she was very much of conservative side, she said, there's Australia's first political prisoner. This is disgraceful. It's disgraceful. But she's had to build it up. And of course, as you build a party up, you get more resources, so you get more capacity to have sort of a closer oversight of what's going on. And that's what's happening now. I've got a real sense of confidence in talking to people in the back room of One Nation. I get a sense of competence. I get a sense of, a perception. I think the work of people such as James Ashby has been very, very good and a very positive thing, but there are more than James. I don't think I'll out the others because maybe they don't want to be public figures. I do get a sense of confidence that they're on the game, and that would make sense because that would mean the One Nation has vastly more resources at its disposal than it's had in the past because it's got greater financial support. So the process of selecting a candidate will be more forensic, and it has to be, because the Australian people want, they want to make sure that if they're going to give you the opportunity to be a senior party in the Australian Parliament, that there's probably a more stringent requirement as to who the candidates are.
Let's talk numbers. You've got 4 in the Senate at the moment. How many do you realistically think you could end up with in the Senate after the 2028 election? And do you think you could take any Nationals' lower house seats at that election?
It's not an attack on the National Party.
Well, anybody's lower house
Yes,
seat.
I think that's a better way to put it. I think it's a case of putting yourself forward in all seats and let people make their decision up about it. But, once more, I can say I know the polling in some seats, and you'll ask me which seats, which means gives away our tactics, so I won't do it. But there are certainly polling now that suggests or states that we would win low house seats. And you could go
Numbers.
through it. Yeah, I'm not going to go through them, but they're both Labor seats and coalition seats.
How many senators could you end up
I
with?
think it would be fair at this point in time to say that in every cycle at every state, you should get a senator up. And then on a territory basis, I think you'd have a prospect in the Northern Territory, but the ACT would be difficult. But that's really up to the people. But now we have Farrell talking about an expansion of the Parliament, which I don't support. I think we're overgoverned. I think we've got enough politicians. But if there's an expansion of the House of Representatives and the Senate, well, even more so.
Okay, but just let me try and pin you down on the Senate.
Uh-huh.
You've got 4.
Yes.
How many could you have after 2028?
Well, it's once more stating, like at New South Wales, the last election, they won a Senate seat. So you imagine you'd win one again because our polling is vastly up on that. Same would suggest in Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, Western Australia, and Queensland. So there's your 6. 6 times 2 is 12 over two electoral cycles. I think that would be a fair target. And of course, I don't think that's egotistical because that's what the polling would suggest. Just on statistics alone, once your polling gets above, 15, 16%, just that statistic says you start winning lower house seats because it's not constant. It's in some areas you have strong support, and other areas you basically have no support.
I'm always bad at the arithmetic, but what you're saying is that after the next 2 elections,
Yep.
One Nation could have a dozen senators.
Well, if you just go through it simply and just go around the clock, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia, there is no reason that you shouldn't, on every election, win 1 Senate position because each one of those put up 6. And
You'd have some retiring, of course, which complicates your situation.
even if they're retiring, I mean, New South Wales, the One Nation won a senator would basically, to be quite frank, very low profile. And that's our polling's vastly stronger now than it was then.
Just a couple of questions on personal relations. How are you getting on with your former Nationals colleagues? Do they give you the cold shoulder or?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of them really gave me for some of them, there was just no discussion whatsoever and for a long period of time beforehand. So it's not a difference. It's no different now. They didn't talk to me then. They don't talk to me now. But for ones who I was friends with, I still am friends with. And I believe strongly that, look, you put your best game on the paddock. And so if we are talking politics, I'm going to go into bat for One Nation because I believe it's my form of conservatism and clarity and strength and unity that I like. And I expect, whether they're from the Labor Party, the Liberal Party or the National Party, for them to put their best game on the paddock as well. I don't want to go onto the football field or wherever, maybe the netball court, with someone playing a second-rate game. I want them to play their best. But you don't play football in the change room or on the corridor. To leave it once the
Round here, I think you do actually quite
no.
often.
Well, I think that's wrong. I think it's sort of rude in a way. I have good friends in the Labor Party because we don't walk away believing that I'm going to change a Labor Party person to a One Nation person, or that they think I'm about to join the Labor Party. And it was the same. And it's, because if you've got a little bit of sophistication about yourself, you realize that you've got to separate the conversation of what's a person's philosophy and what's of general interest and polite to talk about. And, so your question sort of emanated from, have I still got friends in the National Party? Absolutely, 100% close friends, and they'll remain close friends.
Do you expect any more defections?
No, not really. I think that's very common. And see, the people always believe that, because someone jumps out, we're going to catch them. Not necessarily. We might.
Where else would they go?
We mightn't want them either. So, it's not a case of, give us your garbage and we will find a home for them.
All right. Now, you and Pauline Hanson are two big personalities, to put it mildly. How is that relationship, and how can you two manage this into the future?
I've worked with people such as Senator Fiona Nash and Senator Bridget McKenzie in a leadership and deputy leadership role. And we got along. I've worked with David Littleproud as my deputy, and we didn't get along. How do you get along? You get along by working on a relationship and having trust in one another. If you can't trust one another, then you got nowhere to go. I did not go into this relationship sort of on a flight of fancy or a fit of pique. I considered it over a year. I had multiple meetings with Pauline and with Troy and with Sean and with Malcolm. I've known them for a long period of time. And so it was a lot more an observant process. I feel that I get along well with Pauline. You just have to accept it or not accept it. I get along well with her. I respect what she has done and what she has created for Australia. And I respect the other guys in the team because the other people are guys. It's not a case of what's in it for me. It's what's in it for Australia. I truly mean that. If I didn't think I could give something to Australia, I'd just get out of politics. And that's where I was heading with the National Party. It was the only other alternative. It was completely dysfunctional. The only alternative was to get out. And I don't want to do that. I believe I've got more to offer.
Now, you'd agree you've had huge ups and downs over the many years you've had in politics.
More so than anybody else, I suggest.
I just wonder, what are your resolutions for this role, which presumably you hope sometime in the future will see you as leader of One Nation? And do you ever have nightmares that you could blow it?
I think everybody can blow it. I'm a human being, and I've certainly come with my faults. And I'm a human being, and I've certainly made my mistakes. And I don't resign from them. I apologise for them. But, I think people have been accepting and forgiving of them, to be quite frank. And, I thank people for that. And then you've got to look for the ultimate substance of a person and decide whether they're good or bad. And of course, nobody wants to blow it, as you say. But
do you worry about that?
Yeah, well, of course, I think everybody should worry about it. It's life comes with risks, and life comes with flaws, and life comes with mistakes. And you do your best to make sure you avoid them. But you're not a god. You can't say, well, I'm perfect in all sense, and therefore nothing will ever happen. I think also, to be quite frank, I think it's something you would understand, Michelle. We're a lot more sanitised in this building than when I first got elected in 2004. I think even
this Parliament House building,
yes,
for our listeners.
100%. I mean, remember the times of the Holy Grail, and it was a vastly more robust place that would make people wither and fade if they knew what politics used to be like. And so when people find shock horror, and it is. And I don't know, sometimes I think that those people that when I first was coming, so I was a member of the National Party for 10 years before I got elected to the National Party. And in my early, come down to Canberra, it was a much more robust place and with very strong personalities that were very evident. And it was a lot more rollicking, let's we say. And was it bad? No. Did I think they were bad politicians? No. Did I think they were not patriotic? No. Did I think they were very good at the game? Yeah. And, if you read the annals of right back to people such as, Gorton and, Bob Hawke, these are big personalities. And one of the things I think is sad about politics is we demand, I don't know, maybe the force demand sanitize and sanitize and sanitize. And in the end, you get a very sort of, sometimes a dangerously sterile character that would kill you for a cold pie. And so look for the wider person, and the wider person will come with flaws.
On that note, Barnaby Joyce, thank you very much for joining the Conversations podcast today, talking about One Nation and the future in very interesting times. That's all for today's podcast. Thank you to my producer, Ben Roper. We'll be back with another interview soon, but goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.